Coming into this league, I knew my only way to get on the floor was to defend.
So you've probably heard that the Warriors are good again, and sure, their Steph Curry-led offense is difficult to guard, but it's actually been the Warriors' great defense that has led the way. And I mean great with a capital G, like a stop the presses, they're historically good kind of great. Since the ABA merger in 1977, only 9 teams have finished with a defensive rating that was at least 7 points ahead of league average. These are defensive juggernauts like the revolutionary '08 Celtics, the Twin Tower Spurs, and the '90s Knicks. The 2004 Spurs have the best regular season mark on record, a whopping 8.8 points ahead of the league. And after 25 games, the Warriors' defense is exactly 8.8 points ahead of the league. So Golden State has played like one of the best modern defenses, and they've done it with an incredibly progressive scheme that maximizes their personnel, along with the singular brilliance of Draymond Green. Green gives them a kind of flexibility most teams can only dream of. He's able to lock down wing players on the ball, so guards can't expose him when he switches onto them. Here he's guarding Damian Lillard, gets screened, and he's agile enough to slide in front of Dame's drive, then peels off Lillard onto another guard and just takes his lunch money. Yet, he can also switch onto a 290-pound 7-footer in the post and use his 7'1" wingspan to rip him too. He's off Lillard and back on a center here, and this time it's a pick and roll, so Draymond drops back, recognizes that the on-ball defender is picked off, so he closes hard and blocks the jumper. Most players in the world can't guard 4 or 5 positions that well, fly around the perimeter, or succeed in every kind of pick and roll coverage, and yet Green's most important skill is probably protecting the paint. Among 21st century defensive savants, only Kevin Garnett can match Draymond's ability to sniff out threats and then materialize in the lane with a kind of basketball spidey sense. Here's a quintessential Green play. Over here minding his business, but he's ready to pounce when the ball handler springs free and then instantly recovers to the ball and nearly blocks the 7-foot DeAndre Ayton with a perfect vertical contest. At 6'6", Green's awareness and defensive IQ make up for his lack of size. He's playing center here and sniffs out the ball, but the moment he sees that Andrew Wiggins doesn't need help, he looks elsewhere, and because Draymond recognizes a dangerous Seth Curry, he steps up hard to take away any 3. So he can play the perimeter, protect the paint, stick point guards, centers, or big wings like Kevin Durant, and he's basically a coach on the floor, the ultimate weapon for a forward-thinking defense that Steve Kerr and his staff have created. Before we get to what's so progressive about this Warriors defense, we need to start with their fundamentals. First, their communication is phenomenal. Curry calls for a switch early here, then he's behind Fred VanVleet and calls for another one so Jordan Poole can step out high if needed, and then Andrew Wiggins is early with his communication to Poole, and he uses length to contest a tough shot against the clock. They're constantly talking and pointing like this. Draymond tells Steph to stay low, instantly realizes they are setting up a pin down screen for Durant, then changes the call so Curry can interfere with Durant's route, and that gives Draymond time to recover and make it an extremely difficult shot, even for KD. Second, their effort is a constant. Sprinting back here off a make because DeAndre Ayton was behind the play. You see Steph calling for someone to pick up the ball. This time Draymond's the one directing traffic. When there's a breakdown on the ball, he immediately sends Looney to the front of the rim. And watch Wiggins. He veers off VanVleet because Looney has it covered. Then Toronto has to reset into a pick and roll, and it's Curry pointing to the opposite block for Looney, and then Kevon blocks Gary Trent about 5 times on one play. They trap the pick and roll here, so these 3 players are zoning up against the other 4 Bulls. Poole commits to the ball, Curry splits the difference, closes out to the pass which triggers Poole to rotate to the corner, and this is all textbook. After everyone recovers, it's another pick and roll. Draymond is early to rotate, and the second that pass arrives, Wiggins hightails it from the top to cover for Draymond, and then he leaves because Looney is there and closes out to a 28-footer. Whew. I'm out of breath just describing it, but you can see how perfect an offense has to be to create easy shots against this level of teamwork and multiple efforts from multiple players. It's also the second possession we've seen Wiggins trust his teammate to cover so he could rotate elsewhere. We saw Draymond trust Wiggins earlier, and trust is the other core fundamental here. On this play, you'll see Landry Shamet get a half step on Otto Porter, but everyone trusts that Porter has it covered, so no one helps unnecessarily. That means the offense never creates an advantage. Phoenix has to fall back on a late clock pick and roll that Wiggins calls out early and repeatedly, which helps Gary Payton II, and you know the drill by now. Overhelping is basically rotating when it's not needed. The ball is already contained here, and a late double team just bails out the offense. And the Warriors are incredibly disciplined about not overhelping, especially given how much they rotate. Draymond has to read whether Andre Iguodala needs help, and he's nearly perfect at gauging these decisions and derails Durant's drive. That leads to a Golden State runout, and what happens next epitomizes this defense and Green. Coming back down the floor, Draymond has the ball covered, but Jordan Poole overhelps, committing an unnecessary foul from behind, and Green is livid.
Too quick and turning into offense at the other end of the floor.
This is a 21-point game, but trust is critical for this defense to work. Draymond's particularly sensitive to this because of his own evolution as a defender.
I was a great off-ball defender at Michigan State, but in most situations I would overhelp.
And this is part of him coaching on the floor. Watch GP2 come off the corner here, even though Draymond already provides help, and he immediately tells Gary that you don't need to help in that situation. All of these fundamentals, communication, effort, and trust, make it possible to string together clinical defensive possessions. Green helps, Wiggins sinks down to help him, Porter splits the difference on the weak side, and Curry's strong contest makes it an easy steal. Those fundamentals also allow the Warriors to take their defense to the next level, possibly giving us a glimpse at the future of the league. Defense is complicated. We could spend hours dissecting all of the different pick and roll coverages, but what's important to know is that the Warriors can play any of them because of their personnel. They change their coverage depending on the opponent. Looney's in a drop here, and he knows LaMelo Ball loves lobs, and he breaks it up nicely. Against a playmaker like Trae Young, they trapped the pick and roll so he'd have to give up the ball, with the other three players zoning up behind and recovering as needed. They only switch in certain situations as well. Draymond gets under the screen to take away the roll here, and that prevents Chicago from creating any advantage. And while we've seen Golden State switch a few times now, they also pre-switch, and that just neutralizes screens like this and leaves Draymond behind the play where he's at his best. And sure enough, he tags Gary Trent coming across the lane, chases him into Curry's zone for another switch, and then instead of worrying about Steph's man, he makes a beeline for the basket, and that is the stuff of legend, ladies and gentlemen. It can look like Draymond is roaming around just playing center field out there. His man is way up here, and after a while it's like he's not guarding anyone, but this is actually part of Golden State's next level scheming. The Warriors will bring an extra defender to the ball side of the floor to help against isolation or any two-man game. That just kills any roll pass here, and James Harden doesn't really know what to do. They look for a Durant ISO on the other side, so Draymond tells Wiggins to overload on the other block, and this allows more ball pressure while simultaneously deterring penetration. Other teams typically wait to rotate from the opposite side in these situations, and that can leave them behind the action. But the Warriors are basically a step ahead of the offense. Poole is switched onto a big man here, JTA instantly calls for a pre-switch to avoid a mismatch, and Toscano Anderson creeps over to the ball side, which triggers GP2 to zone up these two players, and then JTA immediately recovers off the pass, and it's yet another late clock jumper. And this overload technique isn't reserved for big men or special situations. Curry just floats into the paint here and tells his teammates to zone up behind him, and this is just a wall of defenders, and Devin Booker forces the action, and Steph comes back over to take a charge. Essentially, Golden State is taking away empty space, trying to avoid situations where a defender is stuck on the other side of the court, and the offense has a ton of open real estate to work with. And this is true for pick and roll situations, but also isolation. A big man is switched onto a speedy guard here, and that triggers communication from Curry, who's like a coach out there himself. So they overload and zone up to avoid the clear out, and since this looks like a zone at times, it makes sense that the Warriors actually do zone quite a bit. Only these aren't basic zones from your local high school. They leverage many of the same principles we've discussed so far, because zoning up spaces and helping teammates by reading the action applies in both man and zone. GP2 is dangerous in those passing lanes, and Steve Kerr sticks him at the top of their 1-2-2 zone, and you'll notice he slides down to the free throw line here to choke off this high post pass, and taking away this pass was one of the guiding principles of Lute Olson's 1-1-3 matchup zone at Arizona, where Kerr played in college. That's Steve sliding under to deny the pass to the original Gary Payton, and that zone had a ton of rules for changing positions and tracking the action around the court. And so you'll see players like Payton II rotate or change positions in the zone, and he ends up all the way down on Ayton on this one, who's just a bit too big for him. We could spend an entire video on the intricacies of a great zone, but most teams are running vanilla versions where players maintain a 2-3 formation and stick to designated areas. But the Warriors zone bends and flows with the action, and players still read and react. Poole is closest to this skip pass, so Draymond instantly rotates to his spot, a basic man-to-man principle, and they reset in that position, and it's another tough shot. Of course, it helps to have a mind like Draymond's out there. He tells Looney to get out over this corner screen here, then feigns toward the ball, but he's baiting a pass, and that kills any advantage for the Kings, and it leads to another forced turnover. It doesn't stop with the zone though. They'll go box and one, with one defender dedicated to a player like Chris Paul and the other four zoning up. There's the box, and yet again, Curry slides over with the action and forces a turnover. None of this is passive either. They have Payton hound opposing wings, and it is dangerous dribbling around him at times, and Golden State usually goes box and one, with only one or two viable shooters out there to guard. There's a brief breakdown on this play, but then a familiar sight, Curry directing Otto Porter to the opposite block, and they recover beautifully. All of this means the Warriors can disguise their defenses. Maybe this is man, or was it a zone? I'll tell you what it was, a triangle and two defenders dedicated to two shooters, the other three zoning up. And this is similar to overloading a side, where communication, trust, and effort are key to making the system work. And all of these defensive looks can be confusing for opponents, and they'll drain a ton of valuable time off the shot clock, and sometimes teams aren't sure how to attack this. That's terrible offense, and all of these defensive stops lead to runouts and easier shots on the other end. And this is the final dimension of the Warriors' defense. It makes their offense better. The Warriors are third in the NBA in forced turnover percentage, and they're first in offensive possessions that come after a steal or a defensive rebound. In other words, a live ball stop that generates transition and early offense. Why is that so important? Well, the average offensive rating in the NBA after a steal or defensive rebound is 115, but the average offensive rating on all other possessions is under 106. So by generating so many live ball stops, the Warriors' offense starts with more high-value chances than anyone else in the league. If they had fewer live ball stops, say the same rate as the Portland Trail Blazers, they'd lose about 3 points on their overall offensive rating, dropping them down from 3rd in the league to around 10th or 11th. Yes, this defense is so good that it makes the offense that much better. And this is what happens when great coaching, a progressive scheme, and versatile personnel converge. Wiggins does a great job at the point of attack, and his size allows him to play all over the floor. GP2 is a ball hawk and quick in passing lanes. Looney is a rock as a traditional center. Even Curry is a great communicator and strong on the weak side. And of course, in the middle of it all is the best defender of his generation, Draymond Green. So, is this the best defense of all time? I don't know. The 2004 Pistons were off the charts with Rasheed Wallace. The Russell Celtics lapped the league on defense. And we still have to see how Golden State fares in the playoffs, where they may be vulnerable to size or great shooting. But right now, the Warriors are playing like one of the best defenses we've ever seen, and their versatility and hybrid scheme may very well be the future of NBA defense. There's more on this defense for Patreon insiders that you can access at patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. There's also more content over there, and that's the best way to directly support this channel, podcast, and all things Thinking Basketball. Thanks so much for all of your kind words and thoughtful feedback lately. It means a ton to me, and as always, I hope that you are having a great day.